What's happening, hardscapers? This is episode 353 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And on today's episode, I took bits and pieces of a handful of episodes from the past, specifically talking about recession, downturn, things like this that have come up, especially companies that have gone through these downturns, gone through these recessions, what they saw, what they learned from it, and what they were able to take from them moving forward. So we have Jody Grunden, who talks about how to plan for a recession. We have Stanley Genadek. We have Phil from PJE Lawn Care. We have George and Peter from Oriole Landscaping, Sam Bauman from Earthscapes, and Neil Pond of Urban Landscaping. Each of these guests have either gone through a recession or multiple recessions, or have gone through a difficult time in their business where they've had to make difficult decisions. So I thought this was a topical episode to bring up just because of, from going to shows for this past 6 months and talking to hardscapers, as well as talking to people online, as well as talking to people on the podcast, thing that I hear very often is that last year just wasn't as good as years past, and most people are feeling that. There's very rare cases that a lot of people had some of their best seasons ever. It seems to be regional, or definitely for established businesses that aren't feeling it as much. Companies that have established word of mouth, maybe not as feeling it as much. But it has been interesting talking to a lot of you, talking to a lot of people that listen to the How to Hardscape podcast online, and all the contractors that I talked to going to shows, whether that was H&A in the fall or different manufacturer shows that I've been to so far this year. And I thought it would be just a good time to release an episode like this, just to remind people that they can plan for these things and they can come out stronger than what they were going into it. Whether or not we're going into a market downturn, that's not for me to speculate on, and this could be a really great year, but if it was like last year, now's the time to start planning for this year and how you can come out stronger on the other side of things. You'll also notice none of our guests bring up the fact of lowering your price to get projects through that recession. So an interesting point there. And before we get into it, we want to say thank you to our sponsors. Cycle CPA. If you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. And Knowledge Tree Consulting. George and Peter there are efficiency consultants in our industry, and I've had the privilege of having them both on one episode of the How to Hardscape podcast, and George multiple other times. And if you're looking for a software to dive into, check out the How to Hardscape headquarters software, which will help you budget, estimate, job cost, time track, schedule, so much more. Courses, you can create your own courses, you can use our courses, create onboarding, training courses. There's chat groups so that you can have everything in one spot for your company, as opposed to having different apps for different use cases. And if you want to learn more, go to the link in the show notes or send me a message at How to Hardscape on Instagram. The link is hthheadquarters.com. That's How to Hardscape, hthheadquarters.com. Schedule a demo with me and we'll show you around the software. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. This is Jody Grunden.
So Jody, my question to you to start this interview is, first off, what does a recession mean to a business? What does that kind of put a business into? What kind of environment does a business find itself in when it enters a recession?
You know, you've got some time to think about it, some time to plan and to build cash. And the biggest thing that anybody going through a recessionary time frame is they've got to really build cash and protect cash. That's the important thing of any business owner, because if you run out of cash, you know, you basically run out of business. And so the biggest thing that we teach people is that in order to save enough money, you have to run it like, you know, you would your own business. You know, you can't run personal items out of there. It's got to be completely ran as a business. And the amount of cash that you want to keep in the business really depends upon your risk tolerance. And during these times, you know, you want to keep, you know, we always tell clients you want to keep at least 10% of your annualized revenue in the bank. So if you're if you annualize, if you did, roughly $300,000 of annual business, a year, or maybe it's 100,000 or whatever, take that times 10%, and that's the amount of money that you should have in the bank at all times. And that all times comes into the fact when a recession happens. When you go to buy, when you have a hire that you just don't know, if you want to do a marketing program and you don't know if you can spend the money, the more cash you have in the bank, the easier it is for you to weather that type of a storm. And so, what a 10% dollar amount equates to, it's typically 2 months of expenses, 2 months of your direct expenses. A 20% would be, closer to the 3 months, and then you're looking at, or 4 months, then you're looking at 30% would be closer to 6 months. And so we tell everybody between 10 to 30% of their annualized revenue needs to be in the bank. So again, if you do $100,000, 10% would be, $10,000, 30% would be 30,000. And that's just your cushion. That's what you need to have in the bank at all times. And then on top of that, you don't forget about Uncle Sam, because you've got to pay Uncle Sam when it comes to, we say, in addition to that, you need to build to about 40% of your net income. So whatever that bottom line net income is, when you're looking at your financials, that's the amount that you need to have set aside for taxes. You're paying that on a quarterly basis, and with the taxes, you're setting it aside. You're using those funds to pay on a quarterly basis. We even recommend having a separate account for the tax account. Just slide money aside, every single period. Now, during this time, the nice thing about the government, what they did is they said, hey, we're holding off on taxes this year, so we're pushing it back to July 15th is when the date of taxes. So if you've got taxes due last year, it's not due till July 15th. And that also goes for estimated payments. I think the first quarter estimated payments for everybody here that makes estimated payments, that's wasn't due in April this year. It's due June 15th. So they didn't bump it back to July 15th, but they made it June 15th for the second one, and July 15th for the first. A couple of estimated in July at this point. Who knows? They may extend that to help you with cash flow. But those are just a couple things. But I would say building a solid cash reserve is really important. Building a tax reserve is important. Now we're here though. So now take it 2 months later, and now we're in the recession, or in the potential recession, because a recession, by definition, you have to have 2 quarters of gross domestic product going downward. We've only had 1 quarter, and I'm assuming this quarter will be the first quarter, and the second quarter will more than likely be the next quarter. So we're assuming that we're in a recessionary type period. It's not officially called one yet, but it won't be until we get to the second quarter. So with here is you have to preserve cash. You have to use, and preserving cash is, only buy things that you need to buy. Don't go out and buy a new vehicle at this point. Hang on to your money a little bit. Don't really tighten your ship up. Make sure that if you're taking advantage of some of the economic stimulus packages the government's putting into play, make sure that you do that, but make sure that you use the money correctly. And just be really tight on how you use your resources, because you might be able to work at this point depending upon where you're located in the nation, but you might not be able to tomorrow. Those things change very quickly, so you want to make sure that you've got enough cash to make sure you manage this the storm. So I guess I would say the biggest thing is hoard your cash as much as possible. Collect from clients as quick as possible. If you can, instead of going from the traditional invoicing, which it's pretty much outdated, go to the automatic ACHing, automatic debiting. There's a lot of software out there that will allow you to do that, to where you can get payment as you do things, versus waiting 30 days, which is typical in this industry. I think the average accounts receivable in this industry is really close to a 35-day lag before you actually get your money. So you want to get your money quicker than that if at all possible. See if you can reduce that to a 15-day or 20-day payment. Try not to take credit. Try not to take any type of credit. Try to get payment up front when you're doing things, especially in this industry, because you don't want to be stuck behind bad invoices, working for not getting paid. So there's a lot of things, different approaches that you would take now versus that you would have taken or thought about even taking, just a month or so ago. You just have to be a little bit more aggressive on your collections. You have to be more aggressive on keeping cash. and just really doing what you have to do to make sure that you keep your business, safe and sound. Because as a business owner, your number one goal here is to stay in business, and the idea there is to do it in a manner that after this is all done, your employees are going to look at you and say, hey, I really like working for this person because they really did the right thing. They did, they protected me as an employee from, being on the unemployment line, and that's the big thing you have to think about.
What about the company that just started maybe last year and maybe didn't even have enough time to set up that cash cushion to start with? Would you recommend when you're starting a business to right away focus on that cash on hand cushion that you talked about?
Oh, for sure. Because it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because when we started our business in 2002, we just came out of a recession. So that was like 2001 was the ending of the recession. Like 2 months later, we started Summit CPA Group. And with that, the biggest thing that we had was, hey, I don't have any cash, and that's how I started. I bootstrapped the company completely. I did on credit cards. I'd never recommend that to anybody else. I'm ashamed I even said it, but that's how we started Summit CPA. Took money out of my retirement account, which got hit pretty hard with the recession, and what I had available. And at the same time, did a lot of dumb things. Everybody does dumb things trying to figure out how to work a small business, and I did those dumb things too. Doing this and it not working, and then spending money on this program and not working. That type of thing. And you can't kick yourself in the butt for the dumb things that you do. That's the biggest I'd say biggest advice that you have to kind of think through. Biggest advice I was told. But you have to look and say, hey, here's. I'm doing the dumb things, trying to figure out what will work. And my first dumb thing is to figure out how to not have accounts receivable, not have people owe me money. And, if you know anything about accounting, in a typical accounting firm, they have a significant amount of accounts receivable because they're always billing people, and people are paying late or they're paying on time, whatever, but they have a lot of money out there that people owe them typically. And I didn't have the money. I couldn't do that. So I had to figure out a way, how can I build cash without having that? And so that's when I decided, well, hey, instead of hourly, because hourly I predict, hourly was one of those things that I'd have to wait and see how much time I had into it, and then I'd have to bill it out the next month, which usually is like, because I was so busy trying to get things going, it was usually like maybe a couple weeks later, and then it took maybe even a couple weeks before a client paid. So it was typically maybe even a 60-day cash cycle that I was paying somebody to do work that I eventually got reimbursed for, maybe even 2 months later, and I couldn't do that. And so I had to figure out a way that, how can I get cash quicker? And the way to get cash quicker was determining what my cost was and what my price was prior to going into it, similar to what a lot of everyone here in the audience does. And with that, I had a concrete price. And so, hey, I was going to charge X amount of dollars for the service. Let's say it's $1,000. I already knew that in advance. The client knew that in advance. They were happy with the price. Everybody agreed upon it. And then I just billed it right away. And so what I did is I turned a situation into the fact that, hey, I could not float people's money. I couldn't be a bank. And that was the big thing. I had to, it had to be a company right away. And with that, when I did the flat fee, people were able to pay. And it was one of those things that even instead of, writing a check, at that point, I gave them the opportunity to pay automatically. Had the forms ready to go, had the relationship with the bank already set up, and we just simply automatically started drafting their account, for that dollar amount. So they'd sign off on it, we'd draft their account, had our payment made prior to even starting the job, which was pretty cool. Now, in some circumstances, maybe you say, hey, that's maybe too aggressive. My clients won't do that. Well, why not 50% down? And so 50% before you start the job, that will typically cover your cost, your gross profit, what it's going to cost your team to work and the material you've got in the job, typically. With this type of a business. And so if you get that 50% down, right away, and then you can get the other 50% when you complete the job. Maybe the job takes a week, so you get 50% day on Monday, and you get the other 50% on Friday. Have it set up automatically so that once they sign off on it, you zap their account, or in some cases you do a check. And so, going through a recession like this, I looked at it as an opportunity to try to innovate a little bit, do things a little different, shake things up. Just because things aren't done that way in this industry the most of the time, well, why does that make a difference? They weren't done that way in the accounting industry either, and we made a huge difference there. Now, with the accounting industry, that's grown significantly in the fact that a lot of times you'll see a lot of companies have gone away from the hourly billing and have done the flat fee, done the value base, and they've kind of changed over time. And it's kind of nice to be that catalyst. And with this industry, this should give a lot of people that opportunity to do just that. Hey, we're in weird times. People should expect weird things, different things, disruptions from this. And I think this gives, for those that just started off, I think it gives you a great opportunity. You got to figure out a way to, hey, here's how we do it. And, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it kind of takes me back to, I kind of learned this a little bit from a person that did an installation of a window in my house. My kids and I were playing baseball out in the backyard, and my son threw the ball right through the house, right through the window. It was like, great. One of those things that, if you know me, I'm not a handy person. And so it was what I had to immediately look for somebody to do my window. And so when I did it, I called up a bunch of different places, and a lot of people said, yeah, we'll give you an estimate. It's like, well, I didn't have time for an estimate. I needed my window fixed. And so I called this one company up, and they said, yeah, we can do that. Tell me a little bit about, the dimensions and all that kind of, what kind you have in there. They got the specifics, and he said, yeah, it's going to cost $500 for me to come out and do that for me. I'm like, perfect, $500, great. And the person came out, had the window installed within maybe 15-20 minutes, a fairly quick job for them. And I might be exaggerating a little bit on that. Maybe it was a half an hour. And they walked out. I cut the check. They walked away. I was very happy. And so then I talked to my partner about that. And he's like, well, why didn't you pay him? Why didn't you pay him hourly? And I go, well, I was very happy with I agreed upon it right away, and I did that. And he goes, well, hourly, they probably made, $2,500 an hour. If you do the math, backing into it, it's like, well, the idea was the hours, they didn't want to pay him hourly. I wanted to pay him. I wanted to know what the job was up front. So I agreed upon it, shook hands. And if they took a little bit more time than that, then that was on them. If they took less, then they made out. And it was kind of one of those benefits of that value base. And so it was one of those deals that, you kind of learn from that and implement what you've learned from other things into your job, into the way you're doing things. And so kind of getting back to that question, if you just started the business, this is a great opportunity for you to do things right from the very beginning. This is the expectation that you want to set with your company going forward, doing things. If the client asks you, hey, how much is it going to cost? If you've got everything, all your ducks in a row, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. And we're going to have it, here's how we're going to do it, 50% now, 50% then, or maybe give them a discount for 100% now, or what, maybe a 5% discount if everything's up front. It works out, it'll work out in your favor. And that's kind of the expectation that all your clients will have going forward. This is how you do business. You don't do it on the old archaic way of tracking your time and doing billing, 60 days after the fact or 30 days after the fact, and get your money 30 days after that. Cause you can't afford it. As a business owner, a new business owner without cash, you can't afford to do it that way. And so you've got to kind of make decisions on, hey, here's how innovative I can be on getting cash quicker. And that's the game that you have to play as a business owner, period, but as a new business owner especially. So you've got to kind of take a deep dive into your own business and figure out, what's preventing me from building cash? What has been the one thing? Am I pricing my product too cheaply? Am I paying my people too much? Am I not paying my people enough? And that's why I'm getting maybe not as many referrals, because people, don't like the type of work I'm doing. Or, you got to kind of look inwardly now and say, hey, how can I build the best business I can possibly build? If I can do it all over today, because you're going to get that opportunity here fairly soon. To build that back up, what do I want to do? I want to make sure that I rectify all my issues. Don't spend the money on the frivolous stuff I don't need to spend the money on. Have the crew that I want to have, and really take care of that crew, pay them the right dollar wage. And with that, what does that mean? That means that maybe I have to price my product a little higher. So be it. You know, at the price higher, and people are going to come to me because I give the best quality product that I can ever give. You know, it's no different than a restaurant going to McDonald's, buying a hamburger for $2, and then going to, you know, a real fancy restaurant and spending, you know, $30 for that same hamburger, same really piece of meat. It's just, you know, the perception there, the higher quality. You know, where do I want to be in that mold? Do I want to be the best? You know, the highest quality? Do I want to be the lower quality and just get the job done? Well, those are the type of things you kind of have to really analyze. You know, kind of do a self-reflection, because that's going to help you determine how to build that cash. You know, if it's where I'm going to go ahead and pay my people high, well, then I'm going to have to increase my price to be able to keep that margin so that I can build the cash. I can't charge them the same price and increase everybody's pay to get the best people on my crew. You know, so you got to kind of take the ebbs and flows and kind of figure out, where do I really want to be as a business owner? Do I want to be the best, or do I want to be, you know, just somewhere in the middle? You know, do I want to have the highest quality product? Do I want to be the cheapest price, you know, out there? You know, there's always there's going to be that give and take, you know, and you have to kind of decide that. But the end goal should always be around building that cash, you know, not zapping all the money on your company and buying something really cool to show your friends at the end of the day. It's building that cash first. Once you've got the cash, then you can do whatever you want with what's left over.
As a CFO, say you have a business in this industry and you find yourself stretched too thin during this time. What do you do? Like, say you're a business with assets, with equipment, with multiple crews, but you find yourself with minimal cash reserve and you don't know how long this is going to last. What do you look at from that point to decide where you take your business from here?
That's a tough question, because, you know, if you can't get out and you can't work, and then you can't pay your employees, then that's a tough situation. You know, so there's one of those deals you have to kind of look back and say, you know, hey, you know, looking at my equipment, looking at my crew, you know, and just that's where the self-reflection has to come in. If you can work and you can kind of keep yourself a little busy because of you know, where you live, then you can kind of scale back to where you really want to be. You know, and not necessarily, you know, where you're at or where you're at in January, you know, or February, but where you really want to be today. And it gives you kind of a great opportunity to retain, you know, your best people. It gives you the great opportunity to fine tune everything, because you've got your best people there. So you should be able to fine tune your work and develop that quality that you're looking for.
Is this the time that if you are stretched too thin, you look at that piece of equipment that maybe isn't being put to use as much as you wanted it to when you first bought it, and you decide that maybe it's time to sell this? Or is it time to look at those employees and start trimming the fat in terms of they're not pulling their weight?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, the ideal time to do that is when everything is going well. You know, that's the ideal time, because you don't feel the hurt or the burden. And unfortunately, people wait until times like this, that when things aren't going well. You know, the unfortunate part about it is, you know, if you have that extra equipment, you know, you always want to get rid of it. If you're not using something, you know, and it's just sitting idle, or using it once, you know, a year or something like that, you know, you shouldn't have that piece of equipment anyways. You can rent it out cheaper for that couple of days, and you can't have the equipment. So at this time, just get rid of it. You know, I completely agree with you on that. Get rid of it, and you'll always have the opportunity down the road if you need it. If it, you know, that type of business comes back, or that need for that piece of equipment comes back, you can rent it out for a few days, or buy it in the case that you think you're going to use it and get more value out of it. Regarding the people, for sure, you know, here's the time to make sure that you've got the right people on the bus. You know, the people that you really trust, the people that really do a good job. You want to definitely keep them involved. You know, one person asked me, well, you know, if I've got, you know, 8 people on the team, and, you know, 4 people are really, really solid, and I really like those 4 people, and these 4 people are going to be my 4 people, you know, for the next 10 years or so. And the other 4 people maybe aren't pulling their weight as much. You know, what do I do? But I really want them, because I don't want to, you know, when this comes around, you know, maybe next week, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, whatever happens, you know, I'm going to need those people right away. What do I do? Do I cut everybody's salary back a little bit? You know, maybe cut everybody's salary 25%, keep everyone, or do I let some people go. And that's one of those tough decisions that you have to make as a business owner. What do I do in this circumstance? I always tell people to let people go, and it might be tough. Might be a tough decision to make, but what happens is when you start lowering everybody's salaries, the people that you want to keep, they can find a job somewhere else, and they eventually do. And the people that you didn't really care to keep, they typically can't find a job, so they're going to stay with you. So when everything comes out in the end, you're going to end up with the 4 people that you really didn't want, and the 4 people that are your best people are going to have jobs working for somebody else. And so it's really important to protect your people that you really, really, really count on. The people that are your best team members. Mm-hmm. If it's a short time thing where it's only maybe a couple weeks or something like that, well, that's a little different. But if it's going to be a long-term thing, maybe it's a month or so, that may not be a solid plan to just lower everybody's salaries for a little bit and hope for the best. So I would definitely protect the people that are your main team members for sure.
We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Cycle CPA. It's crucial to review your financial statements on a monthly basis so you can diagnose areas for improving your business's financial health early before they become significant issues. Too many contractors wait until the end of the year to review their financials as they file taxes, when it's often too late to take action to change the outcome. Cycle CPA not only handles bookkeeping and taxes, but they also ensure that you're armed with financial data on a monthly basis to make key business decisions. They offer benchmarking, cash flow forecasting, and assistance in developing targets for financial metrics. With their team of accountants specialized in the hardscape and landscape industry, they currently work with hundreds of companies in this field. Visit cyclecpa.com, and for $200 off, mention the How to Hardscape podcast. Now back to our episode. This is Stanley Genadek.
Starting with that plateau, when do you know that you are at that plateau? How many years might it take for you to really understand that you've hit this plateau and you need to take action to get to that next stage?
So I want to challenge the guys and gals listening to think that they're always in a plateau. And the reason I say that is there's always the potential to grow beyond where you're currently at. Even if you are an accelerated rate of growth right now, there's always the ability to break beyond that. And when I say growth, I want to be very cautious because there's a lot of misnomers out there about, 10X. And that's one of those pet peeves I have is contractors, they read the books and they hear all these guys barfing out 10X this, blah, blah, blah. As contractors, we got to be very cautious about 10Xing anything simply because our overhead is so astronomically high. If we want to 10X or grow our business, we've got to invest in people. We've got to invest in equipment. And sometimes our equipment doesn't cost $100. Sometimes it costs $10,000. Sometimes new equipment costs $100,000 or $250,000, $300,000 to retrofit or outfit your company with a brand new crew that can go out and grow and expand. And so I want to caution guys about growing too fast, but I want to encourage them to continue to grow. And what I'm actually talking about is growth in a prosperous way. Grow your profits. Don't just grow for the sake of growing because that can lead to collapse. And I say this from absolute experience. I've lived through economic downturn after downturn, and some of my most profitable years have been the worst years in United States economic history. And what I'm actually talking about is those recessions, those dips where all of these companies are disappearing. There's a way that you can actually profit from even those stages. So I want guys to grow their profits, grow their net before they grow their gross. Once they've mastered their net, once they've mastered their profits, then start to focus on growing your growth. So whatever stage these guys are currently at, I'm going to challenge them to not take on more work, not take on bigger projects, not go bigger just for that sake, but to do the same work that they did the last year, but see if they can double their revenue. see what it takes to become hyper profitable. And once they've learned that, because there's always a way to refine your business. There's always a way to take your business to the next step without adding extra expense. And that's by refining the processes, by improving the profitability on the jobs, by cutting down the time it takes to do those jobs, by creating a system so that when you go out and you look at a project, and then there's guys right now talking at me in the radio going, yeah, but I don't ever have any two jobs the same. If that was true, then every single job you took on, you would need new tools, you would need new skills, you would need new guys. There's a lot of underlying relatability from one job to the next job, and that's what you've got to focus on. And then what you've got to learn to do is tweak the nuances of each job to improve your productivity on those projects. And once you start to understand that, you can then almost take a look at all of the different jobs and projects that we take on as blue collar contractors, and then you can almost start to set and refine certain characteristics that are common, a common thread from one job to the next job. And when you find those common threads, you can then refine those and improve the profitability. And this is a huge, huge thing, because it's not going to come like that. It's not going to be an instant thing. It's going to take season after season. Kind of an interesting question. I was talking with my co-owner of my company. I literally gave half my company to him. He deserved it. He earned it. Amazing individual. His name is Tim, but he's not as good of a manager as I was. And he asked me point blank. He's like, when did you start to really make money? And I said, I really started to make money, Tim, when I fired half of my crew in 2008. And, he was part of there. He was in that business. But even being inside of it, he really wasn't taking the meat of what I was saying. So I had to break it down a little further. It says in 2007, we were doing, millions of dollars a year. We had 5+ crews running. And in 2008, before the economic downturn, I decided that I was going to fire half my guys. I was sick of the business, didn't want to have it anymore anyway. Why bust your butt just for the sake of busting your butt? There's got to be a better life out there. And so I made a radical move. And what my radical move was eliminating half of my guys and then cherry picking the best jobs. But on top of cherry picking the best jobs, by eliminating half of my guys, I freed up or doubled my own time. I doubled my own ability to pay attention to the existing projects that I was on. And then I looked at every single one of those projects and began refining the process to make those projects more profitable. And in the first year, it didn't make a huge difference, except for the fact that I did half of the work in the beginning of the recession and had the exact same profits at the very first year of the recession that I had at the last year of the economic boom. So 2007 was like the last big year of the economic boom. My profits were equal to the first year of the recession the following year, and even though I did half of the gross. Does that make sense at all, Michael?
Yeah, that absolutely did. And it's this breath of fresh air that I'm hearing from you in terms of, there's this romanticism now of debt is good if it's, going into equipment and you're growing your business and, take on these bigger projects. But, we've lived through this 10 plus years now of good economic time, and we're well more than due for this downturn in the economy. And it's just a matter of time, because this is what the economy does, up and down, up and down. And it's just this breath of fresh air that you're providing our audience right now with this mindset.
Well, history tends to repeat itself. And so these guys should kind of go into these next few years being a little bit wary. I don't want them to hold back, but I want them to begin refining this process of improving their net without increasing their gross, because what will happen is when they're able to improve their profit margin, what's going to occur during the recession is they're going to be fine. They're not going to over leverage their business. They're going to be one of those few companies that survive the recession if a recession comes. And if a recession doesn't come, who cares? You're learning to make more money doing less work. It's a very simple process, but it's not a process that's going to happen rapidly. Nothing good ever comes quick. I'm sure a lot of you guys and gals have heard that before. But what happens is it will take, well, for me at least, I'm going to share this with you. It took me 3-4 years before I was able to really start showing what I call massive projects. Here's an example, Michael. A lot of guys and gals out there running their business, maybe running at a 10 to 15% profit margin. And that's what I call barely getting by. That's not a good profit margin. It's just not healthy to bust your butt to give away 90% of everything you earned and to keep 10% for yourself. What the what? Why would you do that? I got my business to the point where I was making 50 to 60% profit margins. Now, here's how you got to do it. You've got to actually still market your company like you're twice as big, like you have twice as many people, like you have to pull in twice as much work. It's simple. You go out there and you bring in, you blanket your area, you let the world know your doors are open and you're ready to take on work. And people will start to come in. And then you know what you get to do? You get to say no. One of my favorite words. No, sorry, we're busy. No, we can't handle that. And then you start to raise your prices. You start to, the same job that you had did the year before, maybe you did it for $1,000. This year you're going to do for $1,200 or $1,300 or $1,500. And you're not going to gain as much. Your close ratio is going to go down, right? Your close ratio is how many jobs you look at versus how many jobs you land, if guys aren't aware of that. So your close ratio will go down, but your profits will go up. What I'm trying to teach guys to do is to make more and work less. But to do that, you've got to have more fish coming into the net to do that. And then you throw the skinny fish away. You throw the diseased fish away. You throw the customers away that when you meet them, you don't get that warm, fuzzy feeling. When you get that feeling like, oh, this guy's going to be a piece of work to try to finish, you just either A, raise your price and make it worth your own while, because you know what? Nobody's going to look out for you as much as you are going to look out for you. And if you continually put your customer before you, what's going to happen is at the end of the year, you're going to be left behind. You're going to be the one with the empty sack. Your customer may have an amazing deal and amazing work, and you, my friend, are not going to have the profits to show for it. So put yourself first. When you get yourself into this point where you're just this big, fat, happy cow, and you've got all of these amazing profits and money coming in, you're going to naturally, if you are a giving person, then do better work for your customers. When you are financially comfortable, you can then do more for your customers than when you are stressed, when you are aggravated, when you feel like you are behind the gun, so to speak. That's not a comfortable position, and unfortunately that relates to your work and your job, that relates to your customers. So charging your customers more is healthy for you, and it ultimately will give them better work, better results, and make them happier. They won't be happy about spending more money, but get a load of this. They could go spend less money with somebody else and be left holding the bag and getting really bad work. If the customer is not willing to spend more money to get better quality, then let them go get whatever they get wherever they.
This is Phil from PJE Lawn Care.
No debt. Why? Why no debt? Was it just the time that it allowed you to, in terms of your life not having a lot of, like, your personal life not having a lot of overhead, that you needed to take money out of the business so that you could use that money to grow? Why do you say no debt?
So there's some backstory to the no debt thing, but then it's kind of been solidified through my course of my career, of my business, that I feel like I made the right decision a long time ago. So, I come from, it's in my blood. My father was a contractor. My grandfather was a contractor. And I watched my dad in my my late teen years, I was in high school. And 9/11 happened and the American economy tanked, and a lot of contractors got burned with commercial bankruptcies and all kinds of things of that nature. I watched the damage that was only related to my father's debt ratio, happened to him personally and to his business. When the money stopped coming in and some of his commercial accounts, filed bankruptcy and left him on the hook for a couple $100,000. I watched the damage personally, like it hit home. I watched my dad struggle to pay for our house. I watched him struggle to keep a car in the driveway. And 2 years prior to that, we wanted for nothing. My whole life we wanted for nothing. So I watched him. I watched what debt did to him when the economy shut off or the income stopped coming in. So that was a principle that goes way beyond. That's kind of where my apprehension against accumulating a lot of debt came from. And then, you have to understand, I started my business in 2005, and we're really in the growth stages and business development when the economic crash of 2008 hit. And I watched so many of my counterparts in business really struggle, lose half their fleets, lose their trailers, have to lay off a ton of their staff. And at that point, again, I was young and in business and very little overhead. But, again, all my stuff was paid for. So if I didn't have work for the day, my stuff could sit and it didn't cost me $1. And so, making it through the 08, 09 collapse, in 09, I did one, I'm trying to recall from memory, but I think I did one 350 square foot patio all year. And I did a few little landscape jobs where I installed some trees and some bushes. I did some mulch for some of my higher end clients, but there was really, the market was dead. Nobody was doing anything. Nobody was spending any money. And I was able to make it through that, pay my employees, keep my expenses paid, and then come out on the tail end of it as the economy started rebounding, with a solid team, with zero debt, ready to expand. And we capitalized coming out on the back end of that. So 2010 through 2014, we saw massive growth. Because the guys who were really debt heavy never made it back. We were set in place and ready to go as soon as people were ready to spend money again. And then, to roll over into where we are now and why I persisted to stay kind of debt free. Like I said, we have some debt, but it's always, low to no interest rate. And at any point we could pay that debt off if we felt the need to. But, it goes back to what happened in March when the economy kind of shut down for COVID. We all know that it kind of, at least for the good contractors, COVID turned out to be a really good thing for our business and our industry as a whole. But initially, when everything was shutting down, I watched about $1.1 million walk out the door in about 10 days, and was preparing for the worst. I was preparing for none of my clients were going to spend any money. All of my signed contracts were going to try to get out of them. I watched my maintenance clients, my commercial maintenance clients calling in daily, going, do the bare minimum, minimize what you're going to make us pay you. And in about 10 days, we watched $1.1 million walk out the door. And that's the reason right there that I stayed debt free. At any point, should the global economy, should the American economy shut down, or we have another economic collapse like we had in 2008, all of my stuff can sit, and the only thing I've got to pay is insurance on it, to sit, and we can sit here and twiddle our thumbs, and wait for things to rebound without the fear of losing it to the bank or begging the bank to extend our terms or playing all those games. We run a nearly perfect credit score. I have a credit line at the bank that is phenomenal that I could use at any point should I want to. It's just one of those things that, I've got to where I am that way, and I find it really hard to justify going in. Now, would some of my guys like me to go take the leap of faith and go into debt because then they could get brand new trucks and, all that kind of stuff? Absolutely. But for me, I tell guys that my 2004 F350 pulls a trailer just the same as a 2021 F250. As long as they're safe, they look presentable, and function as they should. I'm not the flashy guy. I don't need to have all brand new stuff out there, to make myself feel warm and fuzzy and paint a picture. My clients have never complained about my trucks being old. So until I see a value in having all brand new stuff, I just don't see the value in going into debt. So for that stuff, and that's my mindset is run them till the wheels fall off, run them till they're not safe anymore, then retire them and bring something newer in. But basics, go back to Dave Ramsey, basics of financial decision making. I still, even when it's time to bring in a new truck into the fleet, I buy a truck that's 2 or 3 years old. I let somebody else take the 40 to 60% hit off of the sticker shock, and then bring that into my fleet, and I run it for 10 years, until it's worth more in scrap than it is to me on the road. So I just don't need that flashy stuff. So it's really kind of helped me stay in that debt-free zone. And, it's also, there's a lot of spinoff to that as far as keeping employees around, being able to pay my employees a little bit more than some of my competitors can, and developing a staff that stays around and knows. I mean, going back to COVID in March, without the additional loans from the federal government, without all of that, should none of that came about, I had brought my entire staff into the office and guaranteed them that if they shut us down and don't deem us essential and we can't go to work, I guaranteed all of them full pay for at least a quarter. And then I would have rolled all of my managers and foremen into an additional second quarter. And then probably kept my essential staff after that in even a third quarter, without accumulating debt, without borrowing money, and with no assistance. And that's due to I'm not making $18,000 a month in bank payments on a bunch of equipment and stuff. I take that money, I nest egg that money, I reinvest it when needed. And I have that there. I have a little nest egg for those times. Keep in mind, I watched it happen to my father in the early 2000s. I made it through the 2008 massive recession. And I'm prepared for the next one. And part of that is because I'm not a debt heavy company. I don't see how these guys who run, I feel like if you're really heavy in debt, you're always chasing the next job, and you're always chasing the next payment to make sure that you can keep all of your stuff. And I would rather my stuff sit than chase a job and not earn the margins that I want to earn. So that's kind of how we got there, and that's where we're at still today.
So what would you say to a guy that isn't quite prepared for that, and maybe has too much debt? And if you're asking me, I would say that we're in for a market downturn. What would you say they start preparing for? How would they start preparing for? What kind of emergency fund, and how many months out in advance should they prepare for that?
So, I mean, if you go back to 2008, it was 2 years really before people started spending money again, right? I mean, you had your clients who obviously, aren't going to do anything. But when you're talking about investing in personal unnecessary things, look, nobody needs a fire pit and a patio in their backyard. You don't need that to survive. That's expendable income. And even multimillionaires aren't throwing money away when they're not making money and they're seeing their life savings depleted. So I tell people, 2008 to 2010 were really tough, to make it through because people just weren't spending money. So you think about it, to be able to scrounge by for 2 years, for me, it's more of a people question more so than it is an equipment question or keeping a nice shop or whatever else. For me, the most important part of what I see is my people and making sure that their kids eat and that their kids have a roof over their heads and that all of my people are taken care of first. And so for me, to make it through a year, I have to have, just in people expenses, I've got to have, $600,000-700,000, brought in just to cover the overhead of my people. And then I need about another $1 million to cover, just basic overhead expenses, building, insurance, all of those kind of things. So we could go from, 6.5 million down to our maintenance only, meaning, our mowing, our trimming, our fertilizing, our irrigation services. And I could keep all of my people. I could keep my overhead expenses. I wouldn't make a dollar, but we could make it. And I would say that everybody who's debt heavy should look in their soul and go, what's important to you? Because I agree with you. It's not if, but when this is going to happen. And I think it's imminent. I think that it's happening sooner rather than later. I think we're months. We're not a year away. We're not 6 months away. I think you're going to see a big market sell off in the next, it's imminent. I don't know when. Just my prediction. I'm not a market expert by any means, but too much right now reminds me of what was happening in 06 and 07. There's so much work. There's not enough people to be able to do it. You got a lot of builders building spec homes again, extending themselves out $4 and $5 million, predicting that people are going to buy houses. You have very financially adept people overextending themselves drastically, where reality is they can afford $1 million house, but the banks will loan them $2.5 million, so they build a $2.5 million house. Interest rates are low. Look, the governments can't keep interest rates at zero for forever. And as soon as the market starts dropping, you're going to start seeing some major changes in spending habits. So I would tell all those guys to while the market's hot, pay down your debts, get those vehicles, get that equipment, get that stuff in your wheelhouse so that you own it, and that the banks can't come take it back, because the banks are going to need that revenue, and they're going to come calling. If your rate or your workload drops by 50%, and you have to have that 50% just to cover your cost of your debt, you're in big trouble. And like I said, just like 08 through 10, companies who are less debt heavy are going to come out of that recession much stronger and ready to capitalize than the companies who have lost half their fleet, who have lost their equipment, who have lost all of that and have to rebuild. Now you got guys out there that go, well, you're incorporated, file bankruptcy, yada, 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 start over. I'll get another loan and start over. And if that's your mantra and that's your view, then great. But I'm one of those people that I think about how many people I hurt along the way, how many people I burned, and whether or not I could sleep at night doing that. So and my reputation on the back end, I don't want to be that guy in town who's filed bankruptcy 3 times. Every time the market downturns, I file bankruptcy and start with a new name. That's just not my mojo, so to say. So I would tell them, with it being imminent, all of us know it. Anybody who watches the market, anybody who understands what's happened knows it's coming. I would say that their focus in 2021, or even it should have been in 2020, would be to pay down that debt, own as much stuff as you can, without the repercussions of being able to lose it, so that when you have to cut staff and you have to cut things, that equipment can sit and not cost you money that you're not bringing in.
We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Knowledge Tree Consulting. They are efficiency consultants in the industry with 35 plus years of industry experience building Oriole Landscaping in Toronto, which they are completely hands off at this point. George and Peter have been on the podcast before, and George, on multiple occasions now, I've personally leaned on him to help with the How to Hardscape headquarters software and how we can maximize the efficiency of user experience. And I know the guys at DTE Landscaping, Chuck and Jeffrey, who we've also had on the show multiple times, have hired them on in the past. Check out their consulting services, peer groups, and events that are coming up on their website, knowledgetreeconsulting.com, or check them out on Instagram at joinktc. Now back to our episode. This is George and Peter from Oriole Landscaping. When you were telling your story, the word recession came up. And because that's a term that is very relevant to where we are today, I want to ask the two of you, what did you experience during past recessions in your business? Because every market is different and every industry is different, the way a recession affects it. How did you guys sort of, not necessarily stay afloat, but move through a recession? And then what did you see on the other side of that recession for your business?
Yeah, the worst recession for our landscape business was the early 90s. And that was because Canada experienced its real estate crash then. So that was particularly difficult. And that's potentially more like what we're about to see than the 2000 recession or the 2008 recession, which were more stock market recessions and the money market recession in the States and the American housing market. The good thing for us in the early 90s was we were small and George and I were doing everything. So if we make $5 less an hour working, if we're making $5 an hour instead of $10 an hour, we're still not losing money because we're just working harder. As we got bigger, it became a much bigger risk for us, obviously, because now we have staff and overhead to carry. So we potentially could lose a lot of money if things get really bad. But in the 2000 and the 2008 recessions, we were protecting ourselves by making sure we have good cash flow, making sure we have good lease arrangements and financing arrangements with our equipment and our trucks so that we're not ever strapped for cash. Because you might have a bad year, even if you lost $100,000 in a season. If it's $100,000 that you have to lose, then your business can continue the next year and you can make it back 5 times over the following year. So making sure you're not running at the edge all the time. If you have a little bit of money in your business, don't take it out necessarily and go buy yourself a new fishing boat this year. Buy yourself a fishing boat if you still have some money left in your business for that rainy day thing. And that's always been our philosophy. In 2008, we were worried how big it was going to be because it got really bad in the States. And we weren't sure how it was going to be up here. And we made sure that we vertically integrated our company so that we were doing more of our own trucking, we did more snow removal. We did more things to keep our staff busy 12 months of the year, more things to keep our equipment busy 12 months of the year. Rather than growing with staff or growing with equipment, we grew with services in our slow periods. We do a lot of renovation work as well. So we were taking on renovation jobs in the winter, and that kept staff employed, which meant we didn't have to lay anybody off in the recession. It's more work for us. It's harder to do all those extra types of projects in the off season, but it was what we felt would protect our core staff and our core equipment. So we were in good shape then. I mean, now this is going to be a unique recession, and it's possible it's going to be a little bit more painful and a little bit longer. But again, if you're not fully leveraged with trucks, equipment, and staff and cash flow, then you have some flexibility to weather those. They might have a few hard months. The spring might be particularly hard when you have low cash flow. But if you can get through those really tough periods, you can get across that river, then there's huge opportunity on the other side.
The other thing I'm going to add is brand is the antidote to recessions, right? So if you've got a really good brand, right, people don't want to take a risk with some fly-by-night guy and they give a deposit. You know what I mean? Like the network and the brand, right? So the brand comes through obviously your visibility, right? So they're aware of you. It comes with your reputation, right? And trust. So at the end of the day, there's still people with tons of money. Like when there's a recession, they talk about growth going from 0 to like -1 or something percent, right? But it's only in certain sectors of the economy. Now there's a psychological component to that. But if you really want something done and you've got $100 million, you're not going to be afraid to spend $200,000 on landscaping. Like it's pocket change basically. So the question is, why are they hiring you instead of the other guy? Well, most people in the 1%, which is who we like to work for, they don't want to lose, and they'd rather pay a bit more to get it right the first time. And I think that perception, even though some smaller company could do it, perhaps the perception is I'm going to go with the brand. And it's ironic, like in 2008, they had the Mercedes-Benz guy on TV, and he said people can't afford to buy cheap. Wow, that was a great line, And so in my head, someone's always buying the best and paying a premium, and there's value, right? Like I have an iPhone, I paid a big premium for it, and I wouldn't switch anymore. I'm just loyal, and they got me. So the UX is great, and it's the same thing with landscaping and everything else. Brand is massive, right? So very important to do great customer service, because the referrals are the secret. Like we spend our marketing is on HR. It's not on getting work, because our brand is so strong that the referral system is so strong, it self-perpetuates itself. As long as we do good work, we do great after service, we're going to get more work, because people are not worried about whether I'm, $500 more, $1,000 more. They're worried about whether I'm going to show up and do a good job and then take care of them afterwards. So I think that's one of the biggest secrets, is to never neglect the brand. That's huge.
This is Sam Bauman from Earthscapes. Your last year, I think it was, in your discussion, you talked about how things were, you definitely saw the sales coming down. And at that point, I think you mentioned that you really had to step back into the business, and your day-to-day today looks very different than it did a year ago, because you really had to step in, and I think you had to put on the sales hat again and really go full force in that. What was that year like for you, and how did that change Earthscape compared to, 2022, compared to 2023, and then where you see Earthscape going in 2024? How did 2023 kind of affect Earthscape in general?
For sure. 2022, we had our best year ever. We did around 11 million revenues, like 15% net profit. Things were great. And we started seeing a slowdown late in the year, but we were kicking butt. So we said, we're going to keep growing, even though the leads were slowing down. We saw some signs, like I said, we're going to keep growing. And so we planned for that. So we added more overhead positions, but the leads weren't coming, and leads dropped off 40%. 2023 was a really bad financially. It was a bad year. We basically ended up between 1% and 2% net profit. However, I'm very, very thankful for that experience. I wouldn't trade that for the world. Maybe I would trade it for world, but it was a really good experience for me. It was a good experience for our team, and really it forced us to make a lot of tough decisions and get back to being lean and mean. Um, all of that to say, like this year we're having a good year. We'll be around probably 14 to 15% profit, but we wouldn't have got there if we wouldn't have made the tough decisions of last year. And yeah, it we had to the reality is some of the advice I got was, hey, if you're gonna you have to make money. So we're in order to be a sustainable business, you have to be profitable. And we we weren't you can't look ahead to 2 to 3 years from now and say, well, once things wash out, we'll be able to correct and be profitable then. No, we have to be profitable now. So that forced us to make some tough decisions with letting some of our people go in 2023 and really dial it back. In hindsight, I should have made a lot of those tough decisions sooner, but that's okay. That was a learning experience for me. And by the way, it's really big for me when I make mistakes that everyone else knows about it, so that they don't make the same mistake. And I really try to encourage that here at Earthscape. I think it gets harder as we grow, and we all have me as the I need to constantly if I make when I make I shouldn't say if I make mistakes when I make mistakes, and I make a lot of them, that I can be open about that with the team and hopefully encourage them to do the same thing. So yeah, any more questions on on that?
I do. I have lots of questions on that. Because I do talk to a lot of contractors North America wide, and it seems that they're feeling that same slowdown this year. And I get messages like, what do I do in these situations? Not just, I would assume the employees that you were laying off were more overhead positions, not so much the labor producing positions, or if you were really slow on work, it was the labor producing positions that need to go as well. And guys are kind of starting to think about those decisions, maybe making those decisions this year, as well as really needing to get leads. And that's one of the most difficult things as well. Paid ads will go up in price during that time when things are a little bit more slow and there's more people wanting to advertise and so on and so forth there. So, with all that being said, and anything that I touched on there, anything that you want to comment on, as well as what did you do to get the ball rolling with leads to come into Earthscape during that time and even into this year, and why if 2024 has been similar to 2023 with work, how has Earthscape remained even more profitable than they were in 2023?
Yeah, this is fun. I like this topic. So just digging into last year, like we have to be profitable. So in order for us to be profitable, we were missing our revenue targets by 30%. So that's what the financials were showing, and we didn't think we were going to correct that right away. So if your revenue's down 30%, you got to cut 30% of your costs. That's the tough thing to do, and I'm so glad we made that decision. And because if we would have kept everyone, this year would be probably pulling a smaller profit as well, because we actually had to, yeah, let go some overhead, let go of our C and D players on the production side of things too, because we had too much staff. So yeah, if your revenue's down, expenses have to drop with that. And it is very hard to cut costs when revenue's dropping. So, our first meeting with the executive team was looking at our org chart and saying, okay, what are we going to do? Who are we going to let go? And these are very tough conversations, but they're very important. And our first kick at it was we had one name. We had one name, but really we had to let go a lot more than that. And so it was like, okay, one, that's not enough. So let's like keep going at it. So you had to keep coming back to the conversation. None of us want to let people go. And but eventually we had to like keep coming back to the same thing. So we came up with a list, made that decision. It was actually a termination. So in Canada anyways, like if you lay someone off, a layoff is the intention they're going to come back at some point, but we knew realistically there wasn't any coming back, at least not in the next couple of years. So termination, then they get their severance, and that's just the right way of doing it. So that was Yeah, that was the big thing. So another big piece of advice I would have that we were learning is we were starting to cut people's hours across the board. So it's like on the production side, so hey, our backlog's shrinking. No, cut out overtime. So no overtime. That was okay, except the big issue is you're actually, especially if you have C or D players, you're you're now keeping your C and D players busy and you're sacrificing your A players their hours. So my advice there and our takeaway was if you got C or D players, get rid of them. Get rid of them because and then make sure your A and B players are happy and you're giving them lots of hours. Now it's still not endless overtime and things like that, but don't sacrifice your weak links for your A players. And so that was another big thing for me. And I would encourage people to maybe look at that. Hey, if you've got all A players, wow, good on you. That's incredible. You've got a problem that we don't have. And that's a good problem to have, but yeah. And I can get into leads as well, but maybe you want to have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah, let's touch on employees a little bit there. When you sat down and needed to make that difficult decision of, hey, we need more names that need to be, let go. Um, did you have documentation already in place of, quarterly reviews and so on and so forth, where you were able to use that data to be like, okay, yeah, it's a difficult decision, but this person, this person, or was it just kind of leaning on the A players or your managers in positions to be able to, point those people out and to be able to go that way? And has anything changed in that process of quarterly meetings, reviews, or by yearly, whatever it might be, to be able to document that better and to be able to identify those employees?
Yeah, so most of it was when you look at the org chart, there's, different departments. And even in the overhead, like the overhead staff, there's different departments. So really we didn't want to we couldn't take too many people from one department. So really you look at each department and you say, okay, there's three people in this department, we have to get rid of one, right? Or can we, if all three are killer employees and they're all A players, then can one of them be repurposed to another department? Will they want to do that? Um, so it was more like looking at the org chart from that perspective, each looking at each division, if it's dropping 30%, including overhead positions, who do we let go of, and how is who's going to take on the responsibilities? So that was a big part of it. Yeah, I mean, for sure, people when you're looking at three individuals and you have to let go of one, you're definitely looking at their performance. And we're not a large company in a way that we don't know who's who, so we don't have to pull up their last performance review and see how that aligns with these three individuals. But everyone here is on a first name basis, and
Got that. And then getting into the marketing side of things, when you're looking at it, you're down 30% from last year. Where do you start to get more leads into the business and qualified leads and that? Because the first thing you start to think about, at least my brain, is, oh, we need to spend on marketing. But if we're going to spend on marketing, we need to make sure that that's going to be making us money for every dollar spent, because we're already down 30% from last year. Or were there any sort of marketing tactics that you used that were zero costs and you were able to leverage those at any point? What did marketing look like then, and how has that developed and changed into 2024 for Earthscape?
for sure. I mean, I could have a whole separate podcast with you about marketing and sales because that's a big part of my current role here, and it has been historically. For Earthscape, it's always been that's always been our biggest challenge, is getting the qualified leads in the door. And so for us, qualified leads are someone who we ask people what their budget is up front, and if they've got a budget of $30,000 or more, that's a qualified lead. If they've got a budget of less than 30,000, we historically don't win those jobs. We're a premium contractor. It comes with a premium price, so we just historically don't win those jobs. So we look at qualified leads, but that's our key metric. And yeah, that was dropping off. So how to get more leads? I think that's the question that everyone is asking right now. Um, there's a bunch of things we did, but one thing we did is we actually hired a sales consultant, and we felt like we were losing some qualified leads through our sales process. And a big part of that is talking about financials up front. So this is more, I'm getting into more sales, not marketing. How can we get more leads? But I will say, like, we worked with a sales consultant for about a little over a year, and he worked with all of our individual sales people, including myself. And one of the big changes we made was giving more detailed upfront cost to the prospect. And so before they sign up with design, we're both in agreement. Yes, I want X, Y, Z. Yes, the budget is between 250 and $300,000. Okay, let's move to design. So that's a bit of a sidebar. But working with a sales consultant was not cheap, and consultants never are cheap. But it was money well spent, and getting more leads. I mean, this is something I think about. It never ends. So I mean, just in the last week, we increased our Google Ads spend by $3,000 a month, and that's I think we're around 20,000 a month now for Google Ads spend. But that's the quickest way to turn on the tap, and but the most expensive. So by far our most expensive way of generating leads is through Google Ads, and but it does work, and it does generate a lot of crap too, right? So there's no silver bullet, but that's Google Ads is the quickest and most expensive way to turn on leads.
Definitely.
We put a lot of effort into ask, yeah. Um, And I think my number was off there. That 20,000 number was wrong. I was just thinking we'll be around a little shy of 1% of our revenue this
Okay.
year in Google Ads. So it's probably more like 10,000, around 10,000 a month. But yeah, the 1% number is fairly close, and we'll probably be actually spending a bit more than that next year. But the more of us that spend on Google Ads, the higher the cost. So
Yeah.
we'll all be driving up each other's costs. But that works. It's expensive, and we also work with another consultant that helps us make sure we're um spending the money wisely, I guess. And because you can have generic search terms in Google Ads and just generate a bunch of for us unqualified leads. But so that, like, yeah, that's a big. We use specialized people for that because it's a big cost, and Google will happily take your money. So that's probably number one. Number two, um, I've as the sales manager, I put a pretty good amount of time into business development. So reaching out to our existing building partners, custom builders, interior designers, things like that. So existing relationships, but also finding new relationships. That is an absolute grind. Um, we've hit some home runs, but I'd say one in every 50 conversations turns into something. So it's a grind, but every once in a while you do hit a home run. There's a custom home builder we met with a year and a half ago, and they've given us 1.5 million in work. So that's the home run. But in order to get the home run, you have to have lots of conversations that don't go anywhere. And so business development is tough. I knew that I felt like I was the right person for it because I can kind of talk the talk with builders and designers and really see what their challenges are, and see what their issues are, and see if we could solve it and work together with them as a partnership. Um, yeah, business development, that's a big one. And the third one I'd say is asking for referrals. That our sales consultant was big on that. Asking referrals is also a bit of a grind. Um, but we're asking for referrals from our existing client base, and our existing client base actually like us for the most part. So we try to leave clients with a good taste in their um, give them a really good experience. And if you do that, if listeners have ever had if your listeners have ever had service work done at their house and they were happy with the contractor, I think they would all agree that they'd be very, yeah, I'd be very happy to refer you. So, but sometimes if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And so some of our clients actually didn't even know that we wanted work. Oh, I thought you were busy. No, no, we're busy, but we're always happy to talk to if you've got friends or family that are looking for landscaping or similar experience with you. We'd love to chat with them. And so yeah, some of our clients didn't actually know that was a thing that we wanted work. So asking for referrals is uncomfortable, but that's really important for our entire design and sales team to do that to our existing client base. Those are the three big ones, and I could look into a bit more, but yeah, give clients good experience. That's kind of self-explanatory, and they will refer you if you ask for it. Those are the three big ones.
Gotcha. Facebook, Instagram ads, do you guys dabble in that a bit? Have you seen just Google being much more valuable for you?
We've tried Facebook a little bit, hasn't turned into much, but we haven't really given it a fair shot either. Yeah, we've tried some smaller campaigns and it hasn't resulted, so we just get back to Google Ads. Instagram, I mean, we try to do a couple posts a week, but in terms of paid advertising, Instagram, we've tried that a bit as well, but the results we gone down that path. But I'd love to be proven wrong.
Yeah. And this is Neil Pond of Urban Landscaping. You did mention the 1990 recession as soon as you started your business. Did that recession, although early on, very early on in your business, did that help you navigate future recessions that we experienced?
I sure did. Who would have thought, I got into business one year and the next year, the recession, that 1990 recession, as I recall, was sharp. I've been through many recessions, but that one was sharp. So yeah, it was tough. I was trying to grow my market share, so I'm competing for it. And I think that combination is what made my memory feel how tough that recession was. Because once you get established and if you play your cards right, you just be a little careful with some decisions you make. Don't get too don't be overly optimistic and try to grow too fast in those years. But to be honest, Mike, I think since that first recession, any subsequent recessions we've had have not necessarily been bad years. Sometimes they've been good, profitable years. I think sometimes other people leave our industry in those years, so the people that remain can get the work. So I think the markets always have this balancing, equalizing formula that things sort of equal out. But the market since the 90s here has grown and matured in the landscape industry. It was more of an emerging thing back in those days. Even like hardscaping was an emerging thing. So the growth since then has helped us carry us through these recessions because we got more variety of things we can do, right? So yeah, so that was a tough recession. The 2008-9 one, when the banks in the U.S. kind of went sour, we felt that one too, but we were ready for that one. So we just adapt a little bit and adjust a bit. Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you did to adapt to that in terms of just being lean at that time, or anything in particular that you saw the recession, it happened, and you course adjusted to make sure that you could get through it and remain profitable? You said even then you were still profitable during those future recessions after.
Yeah, we've had some of our least profitable years is when we tried to grow too fast. You're not as efficient, and you don't have the right people with the right training doing the right things. And, but sometimes we've done it knowing, okay, we're probably not going to do as well this year, but we need to get our foot in there to get it going, right? So growing is tough and it's expensive. So when we're not growing, those are the years we make more money.
Yeah.
Because we got everybody in place and we're not trying to overstretch things, so during COVID, for example, I didn't know if I was going to have to park a truck and lay off a crew, or whether, boy, would I ever wrong, because it just exploded and I had to add a truck and I hired more people and trained up people fast to try to meet demand. Well, I probably grossed a lot more money that year, but the net was probably not a lot different, but I got through it. So, what my advice to people is in a recession is you just have to don't plan as big of a holiday, stay close to home, keep an eye on your business and work harder. Just keep your eye on it, work harder. This is not the time to take your foot off the gas. So I would chase everything. I mean, make the funnel bigger, the sales funnel bigger, and sell like hell, and you'll get your quota. If you take your foot off the gas in a recession, well, you might not hit your numbers. So that's a very crude, basic, but in a nutshell, that's what I did, and it works.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. I hope this gives you a little bit of insight of how others have navigated market downturns. And if you enjoy this episode, or if you want a specific episode topic covered on the podcast or a guest, send me a message at How to Hardscape on Instagram, and we will say thank you to our sponsors. Cycle CPA, if you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. And Knowledge Tree Consulting. George and Peter there are efficiency consultants in our industry, and I've had the privilege of having them both on one episode of the How to Hardscape podcast, and George multiple other times. Always great episodes, and I also got to sit down on a one-on-one with George and went through what they do for businesses, and I left that meeting with a lot of value, so I can't recommend them enough. If you want to learn more about what they do, go to knowledgetreeconsulting.com and get that conversation started with them today. And we look forward to meeting you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.